This is Alison, and I'm sitting here in the Airbnb kitchen in Little Rock, hopefully eventually having a landing place pretty soon. And I'm here with my friend Sean, who's based up in the Pacific Northwest area. And we want to talk today a little bit about really to kind of codify. We've been having this really lively text thread with Stephers on these ideas of fungal networks and collective sensing and computation and just a lot of different areas that blend in with social physics and digital currency and managed wellness. And so I invited Sean. I was like, maybe we can talk this out, some of the things that we've been surfacing, so that at least other people can share in the conversation. So I'm, again, situated in this sort of fungal area of a very waterlogged Ozark region with lots of springs and fungi. And then Sean is in a different kind of biosphere region, but also fungal. Do you want to sort of say a little bit about what you've been up to lately personally in terms of framing this context?
Yeah, well, I enjoy, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this forum, this opportunity to share in sort of figuring out what it is that's going all around. And yeah, I hope this is a good, lively conversation. And for me, I keep my hands in the dirt as much as I can when it's not raining. Alison said I'm in Washington State, and we have a small farm or a large garden, depending on how you want to look at it. And so things with soil, permaculture, mushrooms, mosses, this is kind of like in our backyard. So when we start to unravel how this might be connected to the spatial web and some of the other advances, it all becomes very perplexing, a lot more questions than answers as we start to unravel this.
Yeah. And I think to a certain extent, again, I've been practicing stepping away from the judgment piece, because as soon as you sort of foreground that, you're weighing, do you mean this is bad? It's hard because there's all these questions around technology and wetware and organic technology and bioengineering and what the heck is this and to what end, that complicates the conversation. And so I think the more I'm unraveling these things, because I care about permaculture and gardening and water and fungi, I think this is all very cool, but I don't know what it is that we're in, what layer of reality and consciousness this is all about. So I don't know, do you feel similarly a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good sort of disclaimer. If we get going in this conversation and people are quick to jump to one conclusion, that's really not where my problem solving space is. It's really, like you said, just really trying to figure out what it is that we're caught up in. There's so many different layers. And like you said, permaculture, the concepts of organic gardening, conservation, resilience, all of these things make a lot of sense, but there's multiple levels to these things, and maybe not all of them are what we thought they were. And so it's sort of framing the questions is where I feel I'm at. I have no answers. I just have the desire to really, really come up with good questions. And, there's like in certain things that feel inherently wrong.
Yeah.
That without the informed consent of the masses that intuitively I don't agree with, but I still feel there's another level or another layer beyond that we still can't see. So it's onward and forward and in a circle.
Right.
We can, we can sort of
poke around, like
fast changing landscape, poke around. Well, and I love history. I feel that looking back gives us a sort of a different lens on which to say we might be able to look forward as well, which is totally part of the permaculture method, and looking in history, but also coming up with a long-term plan and how we might fit into this changing environment.
Well, do you think that you could say a few words about, you've been looking at that book, is it the one that Uluru recommended, or John Rogers?
Yeah.
This idea of, so I've been poking around the noosphere, right? And then initially it was the world brain or the global brain. And then based on Leo's work, it's like, well, maybe it's a fascia. Maybe it's this decentralized network based on Leo's work and Levin's work. I'm increasingly feeling like the noosphere, whatever that is, relating at a social level to this fungal mycelial network, right? In the idea of sort of panpsychism, the idea of everything being connected, possibly with this goal of harnessing it computationally for some purpose. I don't know. But how that in your research interests in being situated in the Pacific Northwest with this tradition of indigenous animism or worldview and what you've looked at in terms of some of this rewilding of the mind or the Le Ciel group that Uluru is part of, and maybe a little bit of Bell's Mountain, like just trying to weave together the panpsychist aspect of connection, which I've explored a little bit with Itzhak Bentov with this connected universe, but then how that fits in with spatial computing and Web3. I don't know. Do you want to say just a little bit about like what your research is interested in with like the book?
Just weave it all together.
Well, no, you don't have to bring it all together, but just like throw out some of the, like, just so people know what that book is and how it maybe interfaces with indigeneity, because that's something I think we both share in terms of our interest in sort of legacies of domination, but then the ways in which some of the narratives around legacies of domination get inverted to reassert new forms of domination in a covert way, it feels like.
Yeah, well, let's see if I can unpack some of that.
Okay.
So the book that Alison referenced, is called The One, How an Ancient Idea Holds the Future for Modern Physics. It's by Heinrich Haas. And that book was recommended in a neat YouTube talk on the Dream Wonders podcast. And that talk was between John Rogers and Mihaela Uluru, who were introduced to one another at the Bretton Woods conference by Charles Eisenstein in 2019. So I find that sort of significant that Charles Eisenstein sort of brought these two different disciplined people together.
I'm noticing here at this conference, for one thing, it's quite extraordinary, the mix of people that we have. I speak at a lot of conferences, but I rarely am present with people who are really in elite positions in what you might call the matrix. When people come to my events or my retreats, it's usually because they are, a former Obama administration official or a former hedge fund manager who's kind of left that world. But here we're having people from the World Bank, from the Federal Reserve, Larry Summers was here, my goodness. That world, and a world of tea ceremonies and yoga and myth-making, Rianne Eisler, Sherry Mitchell, people speaking about indigenous knowledge, all in the same conference together.
Charles has really been not just the conscience of our campaign, but the voice. And, in all of my life, I've always been very guarded about letting anybody write from me in any public forum. I write my own books, my own tweets, everything. And I finally found somebody who can express my thoughts better than I can, and that's Charles.
And that podcast is worth listening to in full. But back on the
and we can link to that. We can pin that.
Yeah, we should link to that.
So I'd like to talk about that a bit. And your book was published in 2019 as an exploration of deep applied creativity and the challenge of turning blue sky ideas into reality, which I already mentioned about you. So I've worked with futurists, paradoxically, in the past. And I live in the future. I can say I live in the future and co-created from there, with many luminaries who live in the present with us. And in that co-creation space, it really feels like we can turn blue sky ideas into reality. So, John, we met at one such exercise. So we met first time at Bretton Woods 75, which was actually held 75 years from the Bretton Woods Accord. And this was a monumental moment. First of all, for myself and all the people who were there, but in that context, for me, the monumental moment of that event was meeting you. And I recall watching your keynote from the last row of a room packed with enthusiasts and avid game changers that were actually all mesmerized by the novel horizons that you are opening for us. So your keynote was titled The Power of Perspective. And it's a summary of the essential lessons from your book. So I'd like you, if you can also share with our listeners those essential lessons, maybe not all of them, but the most essential of the essential lessons from your book, and I invite them to read it.
Well, first of all, you are an amazing futurist, is the first thing I'd say. Second thing I'd say is Bretton Woods 75 was an amazing experience and just a fantastic conference. But to your question, my contention is that problem sets are more complex than they've ever been. And as a result of that, we need diversity of thought. And we need a lot of people around the table working through solutions. You know, we're trained and we're educated in verticals. And we're not trained to think in horizontals. Generalist, I'm a generalist, or horizontalist. And my expertise, my superpower, if you will, isn't to come up with that brilliant insight that no doubt you would have and others on some of these things, as much as it is to bring people together who can take on these challenges from different perspectives.
The one really is, it's the first half of the book is really a crash course in all things physics, quantum physics, and bringing from, like, say, the 19th century fast right into the last, you know, Einsteinian sort of approach to relativity, and then the kind of current break in physics versus quantum entanglement. And so really heavy stuff that I have a very hard time wrapping my head around. But he makes a case for how this quantum world that we're sort of in now is explaining the ancient idea of monism, and that's not to be confused with monotheism. It's monism as in everything is connected, everything is one. Okay. And so there is no duality, there is no good and evil in a monistic worldview. When we take that sort of monist sort of lens and frame, we can say apply it to a Native American cosmology, and the way I understand it with the phrase all my relations, mm-hmm. and sort of the cycle of life, you know, the Lion King, like everything is just changing matter and form in a cycle. And that sort of brings us through pain and death and suffering, and our time on earth is fleeting. And, you know, so how the ancients embodied that and how it's being sort of revived through, I think that's where we get into this interesting idea of rewilding or the re-indigenization concept, and even how that might marry with the archaic revival concept that kind of came out of the 60s and 70s. Feels like a repeat of what was known as the archaic revival, if that sounds familiar to you.
Yeah, I didn't know about the archaic revival. That's interesting. Or I didn't know that term.
Yeah, and that's, you know, as you're listening to some of this stuff with Jan Irvin and this talk with the psychedelics in the CIA and all these, okay. Gregory Bateson and Terence McKenna. So you get into the indigenization component that's sort of coming around today, where Native American peoples are being brought to land trusts, or okay. in a sort of a ceremonial way to bless the land as we embark on a new religion of sorts. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that even makes sense the way I explained it, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, the land and the land back campaign seems to sort of be centered in a lot of this stuff. There was the podcast, the Aubrey Marcus podcast, where he was doing a fundraiser, I think in March, for the RFK Jr. campaign. And Chase Iron Eyes was present at that. And there was implied later in some of the later conversations that there had been a sweat lodge, and the RFK Jr. had participated in that, and discussions about how RFK Jr.'s father was really connected to Pine Ridge, and I think even had a role in establishing like Indian Country Today, which I was not aware of. And so this legacy of indigenous centering, like within the Kennedy campaign, has these longer roots back.
Somebody said to me the other day, one of the people actually that we're talking to about the vice president position, and that person said to me, the answer to everything is in our soil. You know, we can pay the national debt if we restore our soil, We can stop the chronic disease epidemic if we fix our soil. We can fix climate change if we fix our soil. All the existential threats to our country, we can make ourselves self-sufficient. We don't have to be in wars anymore. And all of that's going to come from fixing our soil, and that's going to be one of my priorities.
My name is Chase Iron Eyes, and I come from the Lakota people, the Sioux Nation. I grew up on the Standing Rock Reservation, and in our way, a man who is, my father, is a very good brother and strong contemporary of Bobby. And I know that a lot of people that are here are searching themselves for strength and redemption and deliverance and salvation from a corporate abstraction, a separation of the mind from the spirit, a colonial process, a process that is instigated by the colony, was instigated against European people before this great country was founded. So all of us have been subjected to. Earlier, I heard a man say that we are all indigenous. We are all native, and we have this potential to connect with our divine nature.
I didn't know Chase before today, but as he alluded to, I'm very close friends with his uncle. I've spent large 20% of my career working on Indian issues. I was one of the founding editors of Indian Country, what was called Lakota Times, which started on Pine Ridge Reservation. My father spent a full day on Pine Ridge Reservation in 1968 when he was running for president, and he saw a family of Sioux living in a burnt out hulk of an automobile, and he cried. And it was the only time in his life, even after his brother's death, that anybody had ever seen him cry. And that word spread on the reservation. He spent 6 hours on that reservation. There were 20,000 white people waiting for him in Rapid City. And his aides told him, we got to go to Rapid City, and because Indians don't vote. And he ended up, he said, if you think I care about that, you don't understand your candidate. And he spent the time on that reservation. The day that he died, he won the most rural country, the most urban state in our country, California, and shockingly the most rural, which was South Dakota. And he won it because for the first time the Sioux came out and almost all of them voted. I spent a lot of time on that reservation, on Pine Ridge, on Rosebud, on Standing Rock. I became very, very close with his uncle, who's an extraordinary, now an elder, but when I met him, he was a young man, and the two of us went to the Arctic. Everett became a good friend. I brought my kid. My father brought us all out to do naming ceremonies in the Western reservations, but I brought my kids out to do naming ceremonies at Standing Rock sweat lodges like we're going to do tonight with Everett. Everett put it together. So we have a long, long journey together, and it's really a huge pleasure. Everett will not get on an airplane, but I'm really glad that he sent his nephew out here to do this sweat lodge with us.
And again, like my worldview was really shaped by what happened at Standing Rock, because I was just sort of entering into an understanding of sort of systems of domination and power and money, because I, found my little way in through the school closure portal. And I went from being sort of the NPR, liberal urban do-gooder to being like, oh my gosh, we need some more radical solutions. And these are longstanding, centuries old problems rooted in this issue, which is true. But then over time, looking back at how that happened, I had someone whose work I very much admired and who was sort of leading in the social impact bond space, who was at Standing Rock actually on the day of the raid. So it had a very strong personal impact on me. But then with sort of a distance of a number of years, realizing that, wow, there was a lot more going on in that space than maybe my naivete, understood. The veterans at Standing Rock and the various, that was, I think it was in some ways like a spectacle, not that it wasn't really important and real in terms of protecting the water, but that there were lines in that narrative that were not maybe obvious on the surface, that were these undercurrents, in which later when I saw, oh, MIT is working with Standing Rock on decentralized, solar energy systems, right? And oh, now Greta Thunberg is going to come and hang out with Chase Iron-Eye's, tween daughter, to promote sustainability, and knowing the indigenous culture's connections with the UN. And it just gets complicated, right? Like, how do you tease apart things that are like historical injustices, but they always seem to get looped back into these sort of power systems, these narratives that tell some of the truth, but then withhold other parts. When I was looking at the MIT Digital Currency Initiative, Brian Ford, the originator of that, his wife, Alison had been an aide to Heidi Heitkamp and was a lawyer in Indian law and gaming law, right? And then we can see how MIT latched onto the tribes to say, oh, you're going to claim your sovereignty with our digital coins, right? You're going to have, and you've done research, Sean, into like peace medals and tokens, right? And these symbolic tokens. Oh, you can reclaim your gambling profits with crypto. You can regain, your land back maybe with blockchain land titles. We can indigenize the blockchain, reanimate it with these sort of, older ways of being. And it all starts to get really muddy. I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, everything with, I used to sell commercial furniture before lockdowns. That was my big job, was contract interiors, commercial furniture. And two of the projects I did for tribal properties in California. And like just stepping into that world in a business sense, it gets very confusing very quickly.
Right.
The modern identity of an indigenous tribe is so shaped by all of these forces that they've encountered for, at least 150, 200 years, depending on what region, but more like 300-400 years. So brings us to where we are today. When you see these little fruitings, like let's say Chase Iron-Eye's appearing on the Aubrey Marcus talk with RFK and the other panelists, there's underneath of that is this hidden network, sort of like the mycelial network. Mm-hmm. We're seeing this fruiting body, and that's what we're looking at, is what looks good, the colorful, unique shape, a different flavor, different brand of mushroom, right? That's kind of captivating because it is powerful. His message does resonate, right, if we just take the words and sort of don't look beyond all of the programs that are going on in the background with RFK. I can see why people relate to it, and part of me relates to his message too, because there is these injustices that are these pain points. And so it's not to say that those things didn't happen or that they aren't relevant. Is this guided evolution, guided mediation that's creating the networks behind the scenes that are creating these Chase Iron-Eyes, Charles Eisenstein, and pulling these little pieces of primordial wisdom and I guess misappropriating them. I don't even know if that's the right word, or creating a direction for the slime mold, right, to sort of go off in this direction. Like the slime mold isn't searching for food. So what's the food for the social movement, for the political cause that's kind of steering this group mind, this consciousness into re-indigenizing or rewilding? It feels like a renegotiation of the treaty process that went down. Every state sort of has a different way that they did it. In California, they didn't have a lot of treaties. They just sort of took the land, and then they created this act that was the Landless Indian Act. And forgive me if I'm misquoting that, but it was the small act that gave all of these small tribes little pieces of land from which to start to both contain them and then let them start rebuilding their economies. And so we fast forward to today, the main thing that's driving a lot of the tribal economies is gambling, right? It's casinos. And, the tribes, of course, they need to make money, and it's a valid way to make money. There's a whole lot of other things going on there. So we can't just condemn gambling as bad.
But isn't it interesting as a signals intelligence in terms of prediction and risk and choice theory that you embed in cultures that have connections to specific lands, although sometimes it gets murkier, as you know, with Bell's Mountain, like who's actually assigned to which land centers. But this idea of land-based culture that have sort of these microbial networks, intergenerational microbial networking, and then you embed it into a gambling risk prediction modeling thing that is increasingly digital, right? Even now the, slot machine, there used to be a mechanical aspect of a slot, but now it's digital. And then the money becomes digital. So all of the signaling of this on this foundation of a land-based spiritual practice has this overlay of the prediction in this new mathematical, possibly interdimensional form. I don't know. I find it quite interesting.
Yeah, well, if we take Alison McDowell's research and we look at, Web3 spatial computing, and then we take a modern slot machine, I think there's a lot of things going on with slot machines that people are, they kind of know that it's not even chance anymore. The mechanical slot machine had a specific sort of odds that was baked into it, but now with computerized slot machines, chance is not really there, and then is your digital twin interfacing with the gambling machine? Is there other things that the system
imagine
knows
what the sensors are. The AI or the modeling, and then trance state. I know we talked a little bit about like trance state or collective or like parapsychology or mind melding within the machine. I mean, that seems to be such a big part.
It sounds hokey, right?
Casinos.
I mean, when the mind melding with the machine, but I was talking to my wife the other day and she's like, this was like 2009 when she's like, yeah, you listen to your iPod and you'd be thinking of a song and then that song would come on. And I know a lot of people have experienced something like that. It's just a small phenomena. But if that was happening 2009, like how melded are our minds with these simple devices, let alone the global brain or the bigger projects that might be in play. And so when you walk into a casino, I have this theory that the casino has its own AI within the security camera systems for sure to be able to like spot problem people. But does the gambling
it's an organism.
The organism of the casino say, hey, there's a guy who's never been in a casino before. He looks nervous. Let's make sure he wins his first few pulls so we can kind of give him that positive reinforcement to come back. And then if we take that same concept from the casino winning and let's say extrapolate that over to these bigger political movements like the health freedom movement, like let's loop somebody in with something that confirms gets over their
inner
trust
story,
issues.
right?
Inner story. And I can relate to that side of it. So when you take a interdisciplinary panel, like what's so neat about that Marcus Aubrey Marcus panelist conversation is that you have 8 different people.
You have the archetypes, like the slots.
The archetypes, yeah.
The mom,
the archetype, like
who cares about the schools, the person who cares about muscle, the indigenous person. I can't remember all of them, but like,
check.
It's like, I can see myself mirrored in this person or that person, my interest.
Which machine are you going to sit down at and pull and decide to put the coin in and pull the lever and hope that you get, a return on your investment with your critical thinking as you engage.
And then we still have the judgment piece, right? Because once you're invested in the team and your sense of self-worth is reinforced in making a good decision of being on the right team, if someone shows you some information that said, hey, like there might be some other stuff going on here, the longer time you've sat at the table, you're going to be less inclined to get up because it's kind of embarrassing if they say, oh, by the way, there's all this other stuff over here you don't know about that might change your mind. People are just, because it's not just that you get ostracized and then you have to find another table and is there going to be another table, but you have to also acknowledge that, oops, I made a choice.
I can say I lost today. I'm a big loser and I'm going to go home with my tail between my legs. But people are hesitant to do that, and I think that's sort of what you talked about with the brain boxing in, once you sit down at that machine or you subscribe to this specific Substack or we invest in our belief system, then we form a bond with it. Does that create another entity beyond just us and our belief system and that sort of acting as a way to kind of mediate where we're going to go in the future with our belief system, as both as individuals and sort of as a group mind or group cultures.
And they're probably monitoring all the brain spikes, right? To
Yes.
figure out who's compliant, who's questioning. And so, so we're back. And I guess we were talking casinos and trances and twinning and signals and groups and teaming and stuff. I wanted to loop back. So there were a couple of ideas that I wanted to talk about to start with. We talked a little bit about the noosphere and sort of hybrid intelligence. I would like to hear from you a little bit about your ideas about the central intelligence apparatus. And then before that, I would like to sort of provide some context. So Stephers has given us a lot of material about Qualia. And I'm just going to say how I understand Qualia, and Stephers, I apologize because I didn't actually get to read the thing that you said that we should read before we started this, but you know that we're all human, and I'm going to get to it soon. But so the Qualia piece, as I understand it, is essentially your subjective experience as a human, right? And so, the video that I shared, what is it to drink a glass of tea, a cup of tea, hot tea in front of a cozy wood stove? And there's this sort of intangible aspect of what that is for you. But you may be somebody who hates tea, and so if they and you really liked being cool, and so having a cup of tea in front of a hot stove would just be like, right? And you would much prefer to be doing some Wim Hof forest bathing in a cool spring, and that's your thing. And what is that like for you? And so it's experience embedded in our unique personal context. And so what I'm kind of taking out of this from the education side is this idea of personalization, and that the future of work is sort of things that humans can do. AI is going to do all these things, but it can't do everything, and so humans have to do some things. You should do human things. And so what I'm feeling like from that future of work and also social prescribing is that there's this idea in like ubiquitous sensing and spatial computing that we're supposed to stand and be out in the world and being human with our live action role play, either alone or in nature or with other people, and have that qualitative piece be recorded and then uploaded into some data lake that can then be queried on in a quantitative way by a machine learning system. So it's like perform for the machine and then have all of those distributed sensing, like we are the sensors, I've talked about that with Cliff before, won't you be my sensor, and World Sensorium from Oliver Reiser, and like we sense, we articulate in some way with biosensors how this is for us and how it is for me may be different from how it is for you. And then it gets uploaded and queryable to this other system. And to me, that feels like this symbiosis, that somehow we may be being invited to dance with something that is either maybe outside of this time scale, as Michael Levin is always talking about, like what scale, what problem space are you in? This may be adjacent to our problem space, but not actually of our problem space, and we're interfacing with it for some purpose, which again, I always say I don't exactly know what the purpose is, but computation, puzzle solving, something. And so there's this two-part system, which is symbiosis, and I really feel like those Adrian Tchaikovsky, that trilogy about that's exploring alternate intelligences, right? Whether that's a nano terraformed spider colony that turns the ants into an ant computer, or whether it's octopi who are doing distributed cognition, photonic optical sensing dance moves for their communication, and the slime mold that has this voracious craving for novelty that hops into humans to get a view from our eyes. And then the last one is an intelligence that is a pair of corvids, ravens or crows, that that function very marginally independently, but one is an information seeking being and one is a pattern analyzing being. And so together their combined brain is superior to each of them individually, or even to individually adjacent. That melding is this superior intelligence, and it's like Gethly and Gothly, I think, are the corvids. And I think Tchaikovsky, like Stevenson, like a lot of these science fiction writers, have a good grasp on some of the larger context. And so I feel like what we're dealing with the qualia, the gaming, the play, the tapping into our access to the field, the prioritizing children or maybe the elderly who have different senses of wonder about the world, who are just learning how to be in the world, interfacing, right? I have a friend who shared a video of a little baby just waving, washcloths around and just laughing. I mean, you have a little person in your life, right? Like putting stuff in your mouth and watching trucks fly by and just this wonder, the bell, you talked about, like we sent some blocks and one of them had a bell, like that sensing for the slime mold that may be craving novelty. It's like, oh yes, more, some of that, do that, please, do it again, and that's the way I feel about what we may be in, but then to what end, right? And do we enjoy waving the wash rags and ringing the bell and doing the things? Would we feel differently if we thought it was for one purpose A versus purpose B? I don't know, but that's how it feels. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with a lot of what you said. I like the bird reference, the corvids.
Yeah.
I believe blue jays are corvids
as
well, the various jays. And so we have a gang of jays. They operate in a gang, and there's one that comes down and will sort of instigate and then distract, and then the other 2 or 3 are nearby. And so they move definitely as a group, as a gang. That's how I see it.
Wow.
They'll steal chicken eggs, and so every once in a while we've got to watch out because they'll actually fly into the coops that are open. And so the corvids, the birds, that group, when they move together. When you mentioned qualia too, one of the things I kind of glanced at that paper that Stephers sent, and it was say that we have our unique qualia experiences that nobody else can experience, and you use the reference of tea, but then imagine also like a blind person can't see. And so if I tried to explain to somebody who lacks a specific sense like sight what a sunset looks like, I can try to describe it to them, but they have no reference for that experience. And so it's not just, I don't like tea, I tried it and I don't like it. It's I just can't even conceive. I have no thought there. And so our unique interface with this thing and this world is in how we might be moved around based on our individual biosignature. I had this theory last summer that farmers markets are a cybernetic steering organism, because you go to these farmers markets, and not to typecast all farmers markets, but you go and there's always a wire wrap jewelry person, a sourdough person, there's a vegan baker, there's, and you check off your boxes of who's and it's archetyping of a farmer's market. And then there I am, the produce guy trying to sell produce. And we just feel like all the
like
misfits
a sitcom
that don't fit in. Yeah, no, we're all misfits, but we're all an individual flavor of misfit. And together we make up the farmer's market, the crafter's market. And then you have the consumer who comes to feed off of that
energy,
plethora of organisms that have come together. But how did I end up in a farmer's market in the first place? And that's sort of a strange, if we start tracing our individual histories and the choices that we've made that have led us down these paths. And it really is a free will question. And in the, I think it's Sapolsky, Robert Sapolsky, he's the anti-free will guy from Stanford alum.
Oh, okay.
You can look him up. And he's talked about how we have no free will. But somebody wrote a comment that I really sort of I've been noodling on, and it's, we have the choice to choose within the boxes, but we don't have the choice to want what the boxes are. The boxes are already sort of there, and then we sort of have to make choices with the boxes that are in front of us. I think that's sort of like the ant following a trail of various signals, pheromones, leading them, how did I end up at a farmer's market? And then I've had these experiences where I'm at a farmer's market, and then I'm like, oh, so-and-so, and it's like we had already crossed paths years before. We were right there in the same spot, but didn't know each other at the time. And here we are later, now we're in this farmer's market. So where these intersections are coming from is it just a coincidence? And I'm starting to suspect that it's not pure coincidence. It's that's where that intelligence factor comes in, the Central Intelligence Agency, lowercase
Right.
CIA, not
Yeah,
the
what kind of
capital.
intelligence, right?
Is it? Yeah. Well, I think that's sort of the big question on everybody's mind. You mentioned the LaSalle Foundation, which I've looked at that organization, and there's this call for primordial wisdom, which is a topic, that we've talked a little bit about.
Primordial wisdom is what is underneath the received wisdom, the stories, the categories, the logic of the mind that is received from society. It's the wisdom of the uncivilized person, wild soul. And it's the wisdom of an animal. You go outside of the human realm, you go into the woods where you have your hands in the soil. And after a while, you know something. You maybe even can't put it into words, but you know something.
But it's humans, plants, animals, and mineral intelligence. And so is there levels of intelligence that we really don't see or understand, and what's driving the decision or the qualia? Is it just free will? I mean, these are big questions that I've been asking myself as I continue to feel serendipity, coincidence. What are the other phenomena in that realm that you've experienced, like when you're hiking or walking around and you sit down somewhere and suddenly there's objects? I think you had a picture of the sticker with the Bitcoin sticker and the airplane
and on the library card and the
on the library card.
It's strange. It almost is like we're already in some sort of live action role play augmented reality scenario. And
if a simulation.
And even the thing with the corvids. So speaking of farmers markets, because I do, for years we had a CSA, community supported agriculture, subscription, and talked about that in Philly. We have an abundance because between the city is ringed by agricultural areas like the Amish and Berks County. And so we're sort of spoiled. And so I come here and I'm seeking this out, right? And so I find an online platform that we can pre-order, but then there's still some regular farmers markets. And I go, and you're right, there's not a lot of produce people because the profit margin on that's pretty tight, right? But
pretty low.
Lot of crafts people, some meat, birds and pork, and so that's my home, my archetype is okay, go to a new place, find the farmer's market, right? That's my fair.
Find the food, right?
Find the food you want, right?
Survival.
The microbiome says, feed me,
feed me healthy food.
Exactly. And so anyway, so there's one in this neighborhood that I'm staying in that's called Kapaa Quarter, which is an indigenous tribe, and it's near the governor's mansion. It was a neighborhood of nice craftsman bungalows and bigger houses that fell on hard times during, the post-World War II, and is now on the way back up. And so there's this trendy, arty kind of district that's maybe 5 or 6 blocks away, and there's a sculpture garden with a pergola thing, which is where the farmer's market is, right? And so it's artifacts, which are this qualia, communication, biosemiotic stuff, and interspersed with the crafts people and the houseplant people and the honey people and the whatever, And so I go because I'm looking for bacon. Last week I got some really good bacon, but the bacon guy isn't there this week. So darn it, I got let down with that. But I did get some red potatoes and a tomato from an old guy who looked like he actually had a farm, So
nice.
And so, but right next to it was literally a bronze sculpture, larger than life, of 2 corvids sitting on a wrapped globe. It wasn't exactly, it was a ball, but woven, right? String theory. And it was these corvids together sitting there. And then next to an infinity loop with locks all over it. And it's just speaking, and I try not to be I've been working on this blog post and I haven't gotten it done yet, but someone referenced Itzhak Bentov of the Stalking the Wild Pendulum, that he says consciousness, when the information starts to flow in, it flows in a way that matches your probably qualia, right? So he doesn't say qualia, but he says if you're a poet, it will be like words, or if you're an artist, it will be images, or if you're a mathematician, it will be abstract equations. And he's an engineer, so he got this vision of structure, which was sort of this, again, like a figure 8, black hole, white hole, reality ingesting itself and spurting itself back out. And I thought, well, if I'm a cultural landscape person, I guess I shouldn't be shocked that the world is speaking to me in sculpture and mushrooms and water. That's just how it is. So anyway, I just...
Well, to sort of kind of tease that out a little bit, though, like the sculptures are there for everybody.
Right.
And is there something different, though, that you're more
maybe not. Maybe my consciousness makes the sculptures. Maybe somebody else goes to the farmer's market and there's something else there. I don't know.
Yeah, and people walk by these things all the time and they don't see them, and then so what is their qualia?
Right.
And what they're just going for.
Well, maybe they're captivated by the houseplants, right? Like maybe their meaning would be in the houseplant, and they would find meaning in the people selling the houseplants or something.
That's what I was gonna. Yeah. I have some friends, and they're also farmers, and they were at a different market, and they found it very frustrating because although this farmer's market was unique, that it only allowed food purveyors, so you had to be a food person, producer, but most of the consumers were going there and they were using it as a socializing environment, and they would buy hot dogs and prepared foods. And so for the vegetable farmer, again, still not selling their beets and their carrots, and so for one reason or another, what then is the farmer's market in that slightly more affluent community? Is that farmer's market steering people to, in an exchange of ideas, or what are they doing at the farmer's market? Are they signaling something else?
Right.
By being there, they're just saying, I'm health conscious because I'm here,
But they're not buying the microgreens.
They're not buying the microgreens, but they're buying the narrative.
Yeah.
And they're consuming the narrative
it's like
of the
a
farmer's
costume.
Market. Yeah, and it is very much a costume, and so in this, again, sort of my own existential crisis, like, why am I even producing this stuff? Am I producing this stuff so that I can be a token archetype at a market that fulfills other people's qualia desires, or desires to fit in their, a higher intelligence? Because, there is if there's no money in vegetable farming, or you're sure as heck not going to get rich.
Right.
So there's other people who do it a lot better than I do, for sure. But it's not the kind of thing you do to strike it rich and retire early. It's a passion of sorts to produce nutrient-dense food, to grow.
Did you grow stuff before you got this property that you're on now?
Yeah, we've always had a garden. Like, I've always done vegetable farming and gardening to some extent everywhere I've lived, even in the smaller environment of like a bedroom in a bigger house. And I have the back patio. I would do container gardening.
Okay.
It's probably something that I got from my mom, and she had a strong green thumb. And so that sort of instilled the love of plants. But we definitely took it a lot further in the last few years, as we kind of decided we want to explore the commercial viability, so that we could produce for ourselves, as well as offer this food to the community.
Right.
And that's the drive, is to get this nutrient-dense food to the people that want it, because there's this big push on food and food security and food as nutrition. And so as that narrative sort of like trickles into my realm, I know it's feeding into other people's, especially during lockdowns. Like, food security was a big thing for people. They hoarding was a big thing that happened.
Prepper, but it was like dry, dehydrated food, right? It wasn't,
Correct.
Not everybody, but a lot of the prepper mentality was like canning or dehydrate, like not even really canning, because people are doing, I don't know how many people actually went out and canned a bunch of stuff, like, a small percentage.
I know for a fact that canning lids sold out for like 2 years, right?
But do you think people went home and actually canned, or do you think they just bought the canning lids?
I think the majority of people definitely just bought the canning lids, right? And then I'm like, I got these lids. Now I need to learn how to can, And so there's an abundance of time. Some people have less time than others. And so we started canning, and I mean, honestly, it is well worth it. I don't discourage anybody from doing this, but just the bigger. So we have this motto, like, everything's a distraction from growing our own food and medicine. and that's sort of what guides our thought. But you start seeing these little like I was watching an OPB, Oregon Public Broadcasting, which is the NPR channel where I live, and they're doing this sort of interview of this guy. He's probably my age-ish, late 30s, early 40s, and he's doing mushroom logs, right? He's inoculating logs with these little dowels that have the mushroom spores, and then it's this very trendy thing, right? People know what it is, and I'm like, are they parodying me? Because he doesn't even have he doesn't seem like he has passion. He's just sort of standing there talking about why he's doing this, and I kind of thought, why the hell did I do all those mushroom logs? Because it's a lot of work, and you produce really not a lot of food unless you dedicate all of your time and energy to doing this as a business. And so I feel like there's something going on with the food system, and how that wraps into the health freedom movement. There's reading the Alison McDowell blog and watching the Alison McDowell videos, and then there's like being immersed in the multi-sensory world of farmers market, where the lady selling the doTERRA essential oils starts talking about her microbiome, and I'm like, something's going on here where the lady with the scented oils, which if you don't know, doTERRA is like the big LDS company, and I feel like there's something going on there with scents.
Pheromones
And the scents, and so she's got this forest bathing.
Oh,
scent.
Wow, forest bathing scent,
like,
really?
Yes, I forget what it had, some sort of mycelial type name. I'd have to go and look it up.
Oh my goodness.
Right, and it's
a communication
they know
device.
What they're doing.
They know what they're doing. They really do.
And she's not privy to the whole, a lot of the esoteric stuff that we're talking about with doTERRA, but then she brings up the microbiome and probiotics, and so that's sort of this buzzword that people are throwing around. I feel like I hear it at least once a day,
Well, so it's interesting. So I put together like that 3-hour mashup of clips of just sort of stream of consciousness of like not me really talking about it, just like interleaving themes of things that are kind of in my head. Like, do these things go together? They seem to go together to me.
They do.
And a lot of it was synthesized from some of the text conversations we had. And one of the ones that made a big impression, Stephers had shared, and I can't remember the couple's name, but they were talking about, and it makes sense. Again, if you put away the good, bad, and the why, and you're just like, what is this, right? And like, what are the pieces? This really made sense. Was that, again, we're a lot of what we consider us in our consciousness is also little critters that live in us and on us. And so the more I think about that, the more I think about the whole ridiculousness of genetic engineering. Because if what they're engineering is just the thing that is you, and you're relatively like an armature for a lot of other stuff that isn't you, that isn't technically you, and has a different genomic situation, then like what exactly is this genetic engineering? Because they're only really touching at a small slice of the constellation that is the cosmic universe, that is your biology, like that's holding a consciousness in a body. So that the whole genetic engineering, it makes me really question. And then someone pointed out to me just recently that the Ancestry.com DNA test, which makes sense, the swab was your spit. You were supposed to spit. Okay, it wasn't a blood prick. It was your spit. Well, think about that. Whatever that was not just collecting your DNA. It was collecting your microbiome. At least your mouth-based microbiome, which is a lot. Like your gut is a lot, your mouth is a lot, your skin is a lot.
Yeah, what is it? How much stuff lives in your mouth? Like, I feel like my dentist is looking over my shoulder. But like it is
a lot. It's complicated.
Oral health. Yeah, it is a ton of stuff that's in there. And like, so our DNA versus the DNA of all the stuff that lives with us, our total coded DNA is significantly smaller than.
It's a really complicated equation. And so you hear them talk about microbiome and you hear them talking about DNA, but I don't know that people normally say, oh yeah, we're doing CRISPR editing and we've also got this complement of your whole microbiome that we're also doing CRISPR editing on for your precision healthcare. Like, I expect we'll get there in the next 3 to 5 years, because as the AI machine learning, they'll have the complexity, or at least the narratives that they're doing it. Whether or not they actually have the capacity is another question. But at this point, like, I think behind the scenes, they've been doing this work for a long time. I mean, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, that's what Naveen Jain's whole company, Biome, right?
Oh,
is
right.
Personalized medicine based on your personal microbiome. And he uses this analogy in his talks, like, this person, broccoli is good for them. This person, broccoli is bad. And so it's the bacteria and all of the different microbes that live in us that eat the broccoli.
But is that broccoli that's imported from Chile versus broccoli that's grown in your backyard? Because I think that's a difference. It's not the food, it's the environment in which the food is grown.
Right. Well, if we look at where we're headed with food is, hydroponic factory farming, or, soil that's nutrient poor. And so we can sort of say use the food becomes a baseline. Like, so in order to sort of tailor that personal microbiome, personalized wellness to cater to your individual biome, you'd have to remove any sort of diversity in the food supply and homogenize the food.
You just create a blank template.
Correct. And so that's
like lettuce
sterile,
is just a holder for whatever you put into it.
Right. And it's what we put on the lettuce, or what we wash the lettuce in, or what we water the potato crop or hydroponic tomatoes with, right? Because that's where the controlled nutrient delivery, and the nutrient part of the farming, of course, being key to, like, they really want to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus and synthetic chemicals, fertilizers, because they're not efficient anyway. So then that sort of segues into the permaculture. But without getting too far into the weeds there, I feel that the food is becoming flavorless. And other people have described this phenomenon too, that the commercial food is becoming less and less diverse as a means of, then we can hone in on what your biome is. Right. So we don't need to satisfy your biome with nutrients per se, but we need to satisfy your biome with what your biome wants to eat, not human food, but
well, and so this is
fungus.
This is the other weird thing about
like
the intelligence. This idea that I've been entertaining lately is like, what is this, right? So we know that there's developments around remote controlled haptic robotics, right? Or the development of exoskeletons, either for super soldiers or so that like 70-year-olds can work in Amazon warehouses. Like they're developing these exoskeleton ideas. And I have a friend, I never saw the movie, but there's some Bruce Willis movie where like you don't go out, like you have a digital twin robot that goes out and does like versions of.
Yeah, that's a great, what is that? I know what you're talking about. It's a good film. It'll come to me later.
Yeah, okay. So
it's not surrogates.
Maybe, yeah, that sounds right. Yeah. So there's this idea of like, I guess the twinning and the remote thing, but the more that we're dealing with the microbiome, and the thing that I wanted to mention that really stood out to me with the clip that Stephers shared, that this couple was saying the microbiome is actually intergenerational.
Yes, I would suggest maybe even something like through the mitochondrial DNA, which mitochondrial DNA is unique in that it's hereditary from the mother to the daughter down. And there's something unique there with.
I feel like I'm cursed. I feel like I'm trying to get over some intergenerational curse. No, I mean, if my child is listening to this, like I'm hoping that it will resolve at some point. But it's complicated, right? It feels like there's this stacking, like of this time again in 4D, right? Like, are we some version of our ancestors? And again, with the ACEs scores and the adverse childhood trauma that Gavin Newsom's so excited about capturing, is there something microbial about that? And so I was also thinking about the surrogates, just to get back to that, like, what if we could imagine that we're actually exoskeletons for little creatures that live in us and on us, that the stuff they would like to do in our time scale or body, like morphic scale, isn't they're not able to because they're so small. So they've engineered a big body to have hands and consciousness to do some things that like it can't because it's too tiny. So that's like one weird thought that I had. And then is that a bad thing? Like if we get to do nice stuff, do we have to like be creeped out by our biome if we're an exoskeleton running, like operating on behalf of the critters in our colon? And then the other thing is this intergenerational biome and the idea of Ancestry.com potentially getting that, and now Blackstone, the housing people, like getting that, and then knowing like your archetype in your housing and how you play into the LARPy role, with mixed use developments, with organic gardening, hydroponic gardens and charter schools and all of that. But even looping back to the indigenous stuff, like I keep thinking about the residential schools, sort of air quotes, or concentration camps, in which they removed indigenous children from not only from their families, but from their lands. And then some of those families had already been relocated from their original hunter-gatherer areas to other areas, which led to dependency on handouts from the government, which include food systems that were at odds with their traditional ways of eating and often very unhealthy. So there's the microbiome piece, there's the food piece, and then you take the children further away from that microbial environment. And like, what is the impact of that on the consciousness, like the cultural consciousness lines of those people? And why would, beyond simply domination culture, like what was it about like erasing that slate, right? Kill the Indian to save the man, the Carlisle. Because when I went to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, which was the model for these, death camps, essentially, removal places, like I walked the cemetery. And again, there's the whole thing about the phosphorus and bones and remains and information and resonance. And I just, at every headstone, I just apologized to those children, and because it felt like the right thing to do, just to acknowledge that loss exists, because I do think there's something resonant in these morphic fields about this. Not that necessarily fixed it, but just to acknowledge that loss. And it said where they came from. And so we're we're 3 hours east of or west of Philadelphia. There were many children from Arizona. There was at least one from Alaska. And I kept thinking, in the 1890s, what cause would there be to remove a child from their lands in coastal Alaska and bring them across the country?
So far away.
So far away. Right, so far, what was that really about? Beyond the domination culture, like beyond the erasure. And to me, it increasingly is starting to feel like a microbiome management project, maybe across timescales. I
go, not to hit the eugenics card, but Luther Burbank and it's the training of the human plant, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's or kindergarten. I think you brought up kindergarten. It's putting all of these microbiomes in a room together and letting them climb all over each other,
right?
And exchange germs or whatever you want to call them, microbes, or be in the same terrain, be in the same garden, right? So now they're all in the same garden, right? Cross-pollinating, but also homogenizing, right? Or because if you keep them in a controlled environment, they're gonna homogenize.
Yeah.
Not to say there won't be diversity still, but let's say I had multiple pea crops growing and I just started saving the seeds. Eventually, I would have sort of a homogenized pea variety, and you'd have less diversity, which feels sort of like dominance, but it's not direct dominance, because each plant sort of gets to do what it wants to do and grow and have its own individual growth.
But it's in a garden, which is a box. Like,
it's still in a garden, and still in it. We don't get to choose the box, And so like when I have 2 kids, and then like I can't imagine putting them in a room with 30 other people, young children, and that's the model. And I'm the one that's definitely on the outside of that model. And I look at it as totally unnatural, when America was, 19th century, we had the one-room schoolhouse. And the one-room schoolhouse had multiple generations, and it would be maybe 10, 15, 20 kids. And then really in the 50s is when we started to see, I guess probably in the cities it was earlier, but in semi-rural and rural America, we didn't really have school districts the same way where you started to bring different grades together. It would be this one-room schoolhouse with a relatively small group of kids, just, commuting and school buses and all that stuff. I don't know. I just really feel like kindergarten is something to unpack there with what they're growing.
Well, in part of my research, when I was doing my mapping, I think it was around the Birch Society, actually, and the Baha'i, weirdly, like weird connections, is that William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper magnate, and connected to is it Citizen Kane? Is that the one that was about William Randolph Hearst?
It was Citizen Kane was based off
his life. It was loosely based, right?
Loosely based, yeah.
And so this is really interesting. So his mother, Phoebe Hearst, I guess his father was a California senator. I don't know, state senator or U.S. senator. He had originally made his fortune mining the Black Hills in South Dakota, sacred fields, right? And then he died relatively young and left her a widow with a lot of resources. And again, the son, the newspaper man, had a lot of resources. She became one of the first prominent converts to the Baha'i faith, which again was based in Iran. Persia was an early 19th century sort of relatively modern mystical worldview, and she took some people all the way over there and brought back, and I think there was some overlap with Montessori actually in Canada. One of the women was a leader in Montessori in Canada. And Phoebe Hearst became one of the main proponents of kindergarten and parent-teacher associations. And so, and again, who wants to be against, and again, I'm not saying good, bad, but this mystical Baha'i faith, you wouldn't think, no one would peel it back and go, okay, newspapers, consciousness management, print media, some of the stuff we've been poking around with Stephers is about neuro-linguistic programming and biosemiotics and print and bibliometry and information, right? Flows of information, which is what the newspaper people are doing. And then the moms over here promoting kindergarten. And then again, you've got the Steiner, the overlap with the Waldorf version and the biodynamic farming. I mean,
in that thing of clips that you put together, the stream of consciousness clips video that you referenced earlier, which is really, really great. I think everything does go together very well. But part of that was when they were talking about Web3 and the tech, the focus is on education because that's where the money is. And I think he says it's education and then maybe healthcare later.
When you get the nanobots.
When you get the nanobots. And why that's so important is, of course, Lynn's work is really honed in on what's going on in Texas,
right?
With that being brought into the education and the illusion of educational choice. And then, of course,
because that's the whole point, is documenting the choice.
Yeah, that is the point.
Yeah,
giving us the choice. And I don't want my kid in no public school. So let's pull them out of school and get them in some sort of either an online hybrid model, or we're going to do homeschool, but we're still going to have this ledger-based tracking system. And your kid, so that was the goal. That was problem, reaction, solution. And so the focus on education, early childhood education in particular, growing young minds. What do they really mean?
Building baby brains.
Mind?
Yeah.
When they mean to say we want to build the baby, and it's all this, even to the probiotics, prenatal probiotics, and it's, inside of the womb, developing the brain so that as soon as that child comes out and is born, they're ready to begin
being
achieving
sensors.
Their full potential. Yeah, being a sensor, exactly. And so.
And think about the qualia
I was going to go with that, but
of little children. I mean, just again, because what I was seeing in the education space, having now a young adult child, but this progression into standardization, right? Punitive, rigid, disciplined, it sucked all of the creativity out of education. Now my child was in a magnet situation, so they benefited from more freedom than a lot of kids, especially kids of color in supposedly underperforming communities who got the worst of it, right? And more tech mining it. But now as the tech can become more organic, right, that the tech isn't going to be just in a screen, it's going to, like, you can send the kids out in their smart uniforms into the forest, right? And so it's the problem reaction solution is what you really want. You're willing to sacrifice several generations of kids' intellects and happiness to get to the stage that you can create a narrative where you will let the children loose into the environment to be the sensors for this biohybrid collective intelligence, which again, if it's a symbiotic situation, we provide the experiential, expeditionary learning, right? I sent my kid to a semester school in expeditionary learning, but I had no framework that it might be related to slime mold or cordyceps or ant computers. And again, I don't necessarily wouldn't take it back, but it's more complicated.
Well, the spiders move the ants around, but then the ants move the aphids.
Yeah.
You know, and then, but nobody asks the ants or the aphids if they want to move to Arkansas or buy 5 acres and live in Washington. You know, and so what is symbiosis? Unless there's informed consent from both parties, I would argue that it's parasitic symbiosis or an illusion of choice. You know, I don't know. That's where I feel that some of what I've done in my own life, looking back as an activist in particular, and say, you know, war in Iraq is bad. You know, United States is blah blah blah, and then we need to think of the whole world. But then that's sort of
they don't say. Also, and here's the book one.
You're like, exactly, we need to think of the whole world. You're going on out there, you little peace activists, and protest the war because we want you
We've
to
got
think
this,
of the
we're
whole
walking
world.
This road. You know, you got to get to interspecies peace. I think Stephers had shared a book, again, I haven't gotten into that, but a woman who's promoting, again, the interspecies peace with the UN. And again, I keep saying with the Quakers, American Friend Service Committee, it's more complicated. There's other stuff going on here with your, you know, Hague and international arbitration and smart contract layers and enabling constraints. Like, peace is the homeostatic aspect of the
homeostasis, homogenization, you know, and so
through
balancing.
Well,
balancing so that you can create the right environment for, you know, you want to kind of quiet the noise to be able to focus on what's bubbling up. You know, like the mushrooms are doing things underground. There's a lot of activity happening. And then when the conditions are right, you know, temperature, moisture, boom, that's when you get the flourishing and the fruiting.
Yeah.
But
all of the bubbling goes on the ledger so that you could repeat it. When you get the thing, you can be like, oh, that's how we did it. We did all of these.
Absolutely.
You know, we played this musical piece and poof, you know, it happened, right? And so it's all recorded.
Absolutely, for the predictive analytics component, for sure.
Yeah. So when we want that emergent thing, we could do it again. If we have everybody tagged, we just like play that again, Sam. You know.
But what is the emergent thing? What is the big thing or multiple things that they're emerging or hoping to emerge?
Don't know.
You know, that's the problem space. I think
Yeah.
for sure. That's the one of the big questions is what are we all doing this for?
Right.
I know it sounds sort of trite, but
yeah,
what is this? You know?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I will say, and this is something I keep bumping up against, is this, because for the most part, people haven't invested the time into understanding complex systems analysis and emergence and resilience and how it relates to Web3. There's so many influencers that are selling the predatory New World Order frame that it's very hard to say, well, I think that they're going to create a game that you'll like to play. Like, I think a lot of people like to play the Bobby Joe Rogan game, you know, and so I think it is going to be more Brave New World than 1984. Not to say that there won't ever be periods of 1984, top down, punitive in there, but if you don't understand the Brave New World part, you might be willing to play the game. And then again, as you said, is it part of it is informed consent, which is what I keep saying. But would you play if you knew? Would you openly play?
Do you have a choice?
Like, do you have
Can
a
you
choice
even
to
not
play?
Can you not play?
Right.
I mean,
can you get
and I
off the
feel like,
board entirely?
Yeah. Can you get off the board? And I don't think you can. Personally,
Yeah.
I feel that like this, what we're doing is we're playing.
We're on
right?
the board, yeah.
We're on the board. Everybody's on the board, and
yeah, we're not saying we're outside. I mean, I think I just want to make that clear. We're not saying we're better than other people. It's just the David Icke Loosh framework of a parasitic mind virus that's sucking your life's energy out to, like, that's one story. I would say,
or let's say we're playing Scrabble, right? We're playing Scrabble, and somebody puts a word down. Allison puts this word down, and I'm like, that's BS. I'm going to challenge that.
Yeah.
And let's get the dictionary. I feel like that's a lot of what I like to consider this problem space is. I'm really interested in trying to just read the rules. I don't understand the rules. It's a very complicated game. The
rules are changing every 15 minutes.
That's it. Wait a minute, they just added a new
environmental
rule. That doesn't make any sense. I didn't get to second that rule. And so I feel that's a good analogy to sort of describe where we are. It is a live action game.
This is the other thing that I thought was interesting. So I'm writing this blog post. It's about water. It's about water messing up me trying to buy a house in various different ways. And then, I sent you guys a text. Oh my gosh, there's this crazy fountain outside my window that's in the yard that I overlook that is the Four Seasons with jugs with font, satyrs, and probably Pan on there. And I'm thinking about the Aquarian age and all of it. And I'm not an astrological person, so I'm not attuned to all of the different things. But, it's, even though it's the water bearer, it's an air sign. And so, which I thought was interesting. And then they said that Aquarius, and the cup is like of knowledge. So it's not just water, but even water is information, right? And it's to be shared collectively. So then again, that's kind of the one, we are all connected. So there's this information flow, the microfluidics of information coming out. And then I guess the glyph of Aquarius is two waveforms in parallel, sort of as above, so below, earthly, spiritual, communication, resonance, which is like Ripple, and the crypto, the XRP. Yeah. And then I read that it was Aquarius is ruled both by, I don't know if you say Uranus or Uranus, and Saturn. So it's unusual in that I think Uranus or Uranus is more emergence, innovation, out of the box thinking, and then Saturn is more logic and structure and discipline. And so in that idea, and I'm sure there's probably astrology people who've done it much better than I can, but if we are entering, and there's some question about when it actually started, has it started, will it start now or 1,000 years from now or whatever, but if we were to apply a lens that maybe the Web3 spatial computing is an Aquarian structure, then that actually fits with complexity and emergence. This idea of Uranus and Saturn, you've got the enabling constraints, which is what Alicia Guerrero always talks about, right? If you're on the game board, you have to have a few rules to bump up against things so that you'll get something interesting. Like if you're an artist and they just say, just do a thing, like whatever. Like maybe if you're a really good artist, you can just come up with something. But if you've got a class of art students who are just beginners, you need to sort of say, do something with green on this piece of paper, shades of green, and then see all the different ways people interpret those constraints.
And I think that is in the nature of the problem with boundaries in complex systems. In Newtonian systems, you have nice clear boundaries, right? They're kind of walls. And that fits in very nicely with Aristotelian logical categories, right? They're very clearly bounded.
The logical representation of the law is incredibly helpful as a way to learn, because as lawyers and law students, we're trained to write outlines, and that is it is a logical representation, and that can convert into code, an express language, express computational language of the law.
Hydra introduces the concept of isomorphic state channels. This is to say it reuses the same ledger representation to yield uniform off-chain ledger siblings. Smart contracts can now be run on the mainnet. This ushers in a new era of development on Cardano.
In complex especially complex adaptive system, because of these feedback relationships, they are more like membranes. The boundaries are porous. They're more like membranes whose behavior is governed by a set of rules or algorithms. Instead of having walls, you've got passports.
The challenge for any permissionless blockchain is the ability to scale and achieve any kind of throughput required to support applications in the real world, including payment, identification, gaming, and mobile services.
In practice, with Clear Access IP and with the Codex Smart Prosecution Project, I've found that the best approach is actually a hybrid approach. That logic plays a very important role, but there's also other computational tools that are necessary. Smart contracts, generally speaking, relate to contracts executed oftentimes on the blockchain, or Ethereum is also a smart contracts platform.
In design, we're used to extreme levels of control over form and the shape of a thing and how it behaves and how it functions. And that's something we've inherited from the Industrial Revolution.
So we can embed these rules into smart contracts in order to enable the agents to cluster in the most productive way and optimize over a goal.
So this use of computational law refers to one particular approach to legal automation, and that is a rules-based approach to legal automation. In this way, you represent the law and the meaning behind the law in ways that a computer can understand, and the computer comes to legal conclusions about outcomes using deductive reasoning.
And as I mentioned before, this can be encoded in DAOs. And once we encode them, so it's not encoded once and for all. So if I have a certain goal, I can run a simulation in which, of course, this is a physical world. We have the agents in the digital world modeling the physical world. So we have this digital twin of the world, and then we can run simulation across all these agents and reorganize our structures, our organization. They can be even our stores or offices, so that when we come back to work, we optimize not only for productivity, but we optimize also for health. Then we can have a different restructuring of our physical world, which the software would enable.
I would say that computational law requires us to really think broadly about what the problems are and think broadly about the approaches.
But it feels that there's certain constructors for models that nature is reusing and recombining in different ways, and that sets of constraints, or always in a different incarnation. But like for example, the currency system in mitochondria. And it's amazing. It's just mind-boggling, and I'm wondering if there's if we could define that language of models of complexity or patterns of complexity, if we would be able to have a different vocabulary to do business with also.
The flows can lead to cascading failures, but on the other side, if we plan the flows for the critical hubs to actually not have that kind of weight and criticality, we can design robust networks. So this balance, the topology dynamics, is pretty crucial when we want to control the flows through networks in order to, it can be flows of people, interactions, or flows in case of people interactions that can accelerate or decelerate. So we can optimize the networks.
This is a standard epigenetic landscape that Conrad Waddington formulated, 50s, 40s, I don't know. But imagine if you only thought in terms of energetic power relations. All people would think of is pushing the ball here to counteract gravity and try to get it over this hump. But if you look at the right-hand image, you realize that it's all these underlying constraints that are creating the landscape that if you were able to adjust the constraints that produce the landscape, you would change the topology of the landscape and the system might go in the direction that you wanted it to.
And that this version of computational law is becoming more important these days because we're seeing a lot more law embedded in technological systems.
So the suggestion that complex system has is you're better off trying to manage an ongoing complex system by focusing on the constraints that underpin or subtend the obvious surface phenomena than it is to try to change it through powers.
Is following exactly how nature is optimizing for robustness. So this process of organic governance, just as you have seen with the ants optimizing for the path to the food and from the food to their workplace, we can have these norms and rules in our institutions emerge from the individual agent interactions.
With nature, there is this diversity that happens without necessarily having a reward function, right? This is good or bad. Things just happen, and some of them happen to have wings, and some of them happen to have scales, and you end up with this incredible potential for diversity. So I think the future of design is in that soft control, is in the ability to design highly controlled systems that enable the loss of control, and creativity is very much part of this.
One thing about smart contracts, though, and the biggest development that I think has happened here is Ethereum. Ethereum is a blockchain tool. All blockchain is a ledger. It's a ledger of hashes of things that have happened on the ledger. Ethereum allows you to embed information into that ledger. So it's not just a transaction of Bitcoin, but it can be a transaction of something containing many terms potentially. And that's what makes smart contracts in that context really attractive from a legal tech standpoint.
Last 2 years, there have been at least 4 books that have come out about fungi, and for example, things like lichen, where there is symbiosis between kingdoms. A fungi is not in the same kingdom, biology kingdom, as a plant. And yet the mycorrhizae that basically sustain the biosphere's sequestration of carbon and nitrogen, that's a symbiotic relationship. It's not at all a competitive relation.
Right.
So I am wondering whether this notion of Darwin's of red in tooth and claw, and another interesting thing in Darwin, survival of the fittest, we tend to think of it as a competition in a race. The one that's faster is going to win and the others are going to lose. The way Darwin and that period of time thought of fittest is that you go to a tailor to be fitted for a new suit of clothes. It's like a fitting. I have to go to a fitting. I'm being fitted by my tailor for a new suit of clothes. What that fitting is a process of co-adjustment between the actual constraints of the cloth and the actual constraints of the body and the movement. I think that thinking in terms of enabling constraints to facilitate new symbioses, instead of putting a moat in front of a medieval castle and a wall, right, you start using passports. But what that means is you've got rules that regulate the functioning of those membranes or those boundaries.
Because creativity is all about letting go and beginning again and beginning again and beginning again. And when you cannot let go, you cannot be creative, and you can't find novelty. But I think that letting go is a moment that enables empowerment, agency, creativity, emergence. And they're all connected. They are sort of associate themselves with definition of destiny or the inevitable.
Do you think there's like a vocabulary of model patterns that's universal.
I suspect that if there are such patterns, it has to all bottom out in thermodynamics. So whether it is ATP energy flow or electrical or bio or nutrients or whatever, the pattern must facilitate energy flow better than not having that pattern. Yeah. And some patterns may be better than others at facilitating energy flow. So over time, you get even abiotic selection of the more efficient, effective thermodynamic patterns throughout the cosmos, which is why you get spirals of galaxies, which is why you get, that sort of thing.
So I feel like what Nicole Shanahan is bringing into the Bobby campaign is the awareness of smart contracts, spatial computing, the Sergey Brin, Google Health, Precision Health stuff. Like, she's in a position to set up the Saturn side of the board, right? And then we'll catalyze with some interesting emergent stuff, which is the slime mold, fungal, mycelial, poking around and foraging for information. And so, to me, this came out of how do I deal with all the stuff that I keep bumping up against water? Like, water is just in my way everywhere. And it's good. We need water, but it's in all the wrong places. And how do I think about it? And then it just opened the door to, the Aquarius. Yeah, this is what it's starting to feel like, is the game board. Yeah, the Saturn is dynamic. And we may be in our emergence, if we're linked on ledgers, be influencing the rules of the game as we play it. But it doesn't make me any more comfortable with the game. I'm not legitimizing the game. I'm just exploring what it is.
I think the Aquarius, the cup, is definitely, the vessel, the containment, the box, however you want to look at that. Water, the go with the flow expression. So you have water in nature, natural wisdom, primordial wisdom, but water can be corralled, water can be irrigated, water can be ponded, dammed. Water goes where you make it go if you're engineering a system of information.
And Guerrero specifically talks about that topology. And so on the one hand, and I think I talked about that in the sort of response video to that the conspiracy guy, he is framing it as power and force. But what Guerrero is saying is oh no, you can just change the topology, underneath. You can push that part up and pull this part down, which is kind of what I was dealing with this house, with torrential rains and topology. Oh no, you could arrange it so that the water goes, where you want it to go without forcing it.
Well, that's when we talk about permaculture, water is a huge focus of the permaculture method. And understanding, when I did the permaculture design program through Oregon State University, there's a lot focused on not just the watersheds that you're a part of, the macro to the micro and to all of the different tributaries, and understanding exactly where you fit in the topography and the terrain, but how much water moves through your site. How much information is coming through your specific area of land. And how do you manage that water? How do you control that water? Because it's really, it's eroding. Water, if you're trying to do any sort of farming or cultivation, uncovered ground, bare ground is super susceptible to nutrient loss as the water impacts, slowing the water down and allowing it to percolate through the terrain.
But think about that with digital currency, right? These communities.
I'm hoping
right?
that's coming through.
You can create constraints within the current to slow, and again, is it good or we have to set aside good or bad because we don't know why, right? We don't know what the point of this game is.
Well, for reference too, I feel it's important at this time in the conversation to let people know that Nicole Shanahan turned her freshwater swimming pool into a saltwater swimming pool. So I feel that there's something there with salt as well, and so the salinity, and then how that, of course, I don't know. Who does that? Who turns their swimming pool into a salt pool?
Right.
And what would be the advantages of that?
But isn't some of the salt stuff related to like, what was it, the sensory deprivation chambers, if you get a lot of salt?
You need a lot of salt. Yeah, I was looking at this. It's like 200 gallons of water and 800 pounds of Epsom salt. So if you do the math there, that's like, and it's like $1 a pound for bulk Epsom salt. But that's getting a little off topic. But yeah, if she put enough salt in, she could have a very, very large sensory deprivation tank. And then what is the sensory deprivation? You know, there's a lot of people swear by it. I've never done it. I'm sort of on the fence. I'd like to try it to say I've done it. But, you know, that gets into like John Lilly and, you know, floating in the tank and sort of forcing these near-death experiences. And then you're right back into the psychedelics and what might be going on there. And then, you know, the concept of microdosing as it sits up against, say, new German medicine and flower remedies. Like, so do you need to take like 1/10 of a gram, or can you take like 1/10 of a 10th, like 100th of a gram, or even a smaller amount if we're saying, if there's validity to homeopathy and that water has this memory. And so we might be able to sort of allow people to drink from the cup of knowledge, or, you know, Aquarius is bringing us this cup and pouring out this water remedy.
Well, how does that fit into?
What is the memory of the water? And then
Verily's wastewater scans. You want to say something about
that? Verily's wastewater scan. Well, that
in the circular economy.
Every week I get a new hypothesis on what Verily might be doing. But for those that
but Verily is also trust, right? Like verify, kind of like there's a verdad, like a truth.
True, Veritas, you know, Veritas. So you have Project Veritas, you know, but Verily is very, verily not understood. At this point, I get a new hypothesis every week. Microdosing is this new thing that it's been pushed for a few years now, at least, you know, 1/10 of a gram or 1/20th of a gram of psilocybin or other hallucinogenic psychoactive substances. But then, you know, when we do flower remedies, you're just taking the petals, the bloom of the flower, putting it in the water for a few hours, and then there's supposed to be an energetic signature transfer from the flower to the water, and then you're discarding all of the vegetative material, and then you're stabilizing that water with, you know, usually like brandy or something else, so it doesn't grow any sort of mold. But a flower remedy, a homeopathic, like a liquid homeopathic. A tincture is a concentrate, right? Okay. So if I'm taking a root and I'm tincturing, I'm trying to extract all the nutrients out of whatever I'm tincturing. Okay. And then like concentrating that and taking it into minute doses. I might dilute it, but it's a concentrated amount of medicine. Whereas a homeopath is, you know, or a flower remedy in particular, it has almost no measurable flower in it. It's just water, right? And so how might something like that be combined with psychoactive substances, where, like, if you're going to drink a bottle of water, it's called, instead of smart water, it's called spiritual awakening water, and you take a sip of spiritual awakening water.
Well, think about the water industry, right? Coca-Cola, like Dasani, like the lead into this decades of bottled water, the smart water, the, you know, branded.
It's called smart water,
right?
You know?
Yeah. And even now they have Internet of Things connected water bottles, so you can be properly hydrated, and, you know. But can we say something about the tardigrades?
Oh, like, yeah, you can talk. We could talk for hours.
I know. Well, maybe just a brief thing, because
what are tardigrades? I feel like starting just with what are tardigrades for those that don't know what they are.
Okay, so
like, how do you
they're
describe
teeny tiny creatures. I don't know if they're exactly they're like 1 millimeter. Maybe you could see them with the naked eye, but you could see them with a microscope, a regular microscope.
With a very early microscope, they were one of the very first things that was seen. So it's like a super important part of microscopes too. Spinoza, or I forget his name, the guy who invented microscopes and then discovered water, the tardigrades.
Oh wow! No, I didn't know that. Okay, so they're almost. I mean, the pictures I've seen are almost like they're translucent, and they have like 6 legs, and 2 of them are bent the other way, and they're also called water bearers, or moss bears because they have a cuticle around them, and their optimal living environment is moist. You know, they're creatures of moistness, and so they live in the moss. They're all over the world. There's all different kinds, but they're mostly distributed throughout the globe, and they're very resilient. You can freeze them.
Yeah.
You can make them, you can boil them, you can irradiate them, you can expose them to conditions of outer space, and for the most part, they're not categorized technically as extremophiles, because extremophiles are exposed to those conditions and they thrive. It's their optimal. In tardigrades, it's not optimal for them, but they can make it, mostly, they make it through. So they're very sturdy. They're like extremophile adjacent, which I think is interesting because I'm trying to put these pieces together. Carrie Mullis's work with the PCR test was related to extremophiles, like these organisms that lived in Yellowstone in the hot springs. So and then Carrie Mullis later was involved with these Italian quantum psychiatrists, you know, to a certain extent. So there's something going on with like consciousness in extremophiles that seems to be like kissing cousins to tardigrades. I don't know.
Yeah, the tardigrades, they can completely dehydrate or desiccate.
Yeah.
And, you know.
Oh, and what's that called?
A tune state.
A tune state, but then one of the processes is called cryptobiosis, right?
A cryptobiosis,
Crypto, right? Oh, that must just be a, you know.
Just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence, right? Cryptobiosis.
I like the tune state is a timekeeping unit, the tune, T-U-N, and that's used in Mayan cosmology.
Oh.
In the Mayan calendar.
Oh,
I forget what denomination. I think it's like a certain number of years, a long number of years.
Okay.
So I find that sort of interesting that they were named the tune state. And so if you could say cryptobiosis and how that could be, you know, what happens to the organisms for a long period of time before they rehydrate in a new environment, you know,
right.
So they kind of go into this very, very, very deep sleep,
like a
so they don't die.
And
Yeah,
this dehydration is being foregrounded now in the Netflix series, The 3-Body Problem, because I can't remember the person's name, Lou Cixin or whatever. It was based on a set of books, novels. And the author specifically said that this idea of living in a chaotic world with these suns that kept lining up in crazy ways and exterminating everyone, the resolution was to dehydrate large numbers of people. And then occasionally when they thought it was safe, they would rehydrate them. And the author's framework for that was based on the water bear biology. And then the other piece of it is that there's some aspect of, because it's different from cryonics, they're not freezing them.
Not freezing,
because
no.
the problem with that is that the cell structure gets all muddled up. Like, it's hard to make things come back. And this is what is interesting to me about the idea of phase shifts, is that there's some sort of indeterminate kinds of proteins in the biology of the tardigrade that literally allows them to vitrify. They not only dehydrate, but their body turns into some sort of biological glass.
Maybe almost like a liquid glass, another fascial gel.
Yes,
right? Like it's not brittle glass because or maybe it is. I don't know enough about the glassification of tardigrades a lot.
But they're very unique, and so scientists are super interested in them. And then they've literally
taken some proteins and tried to inject it into humans. They did rat
stem
studies.
cells. I think they put them in human stem cells and integrated to create like chimera for supposed super soldiers or radiation exposure. But
for space travel.
Right. Because Trent McConaughey of Ocean Protocol says, primates in tin cans was never going to go well to go to, Alpha Centauri.
No, the whole radiation thing doesn't work very well.
Right.
So what about exploring the cosmos? Now, there's a hitch. You might think, we've got Earth, we've got Mars. And beyond that, though, the next closest planet is Proxima Centauri. It's 4 light years away. But at maximum speeds of today's travel flights, it will take 81,000 years. Oops. So, and Charlie Stross, the sci-fi author, I love this quote. He says, "Sending canned primates was never going to end happily," right? We're basically primates in tin cans flying around the cosmos. So taking 81,000 years to get there is probably not going to work. So I could expand this slide into a whole talk, and I have before, but there is a lot of reason to see, can we migrate our minds into a better substrate?
What is space, right? And in my way of thinking, I'm increasingly feeling like space is a lattice, a system of informational fields that's some sort of lattice crystal structure that we need to have a different physics to explore it, or explore that these different information fields that are maybe made available through altered states of consciousness in conjunction with the radiation exposure, and then bring it back to integrate it into our biology that's networked in consciousness, you know. But imagine that you could make a digital twin. So we know that they've been working on artificial DNA data storage, like University of Washington, and again, Pacific Northwest, you know, a very mossy, moist place with probably lots of tardigrades. They're working on DNA data storage, artificial DNA, right? But if you were going to model impervious, resilient, timeless data storage, would you not look at the creature that's the most resilient to store it in, or use their biology as the model? Yeah. Like, you totally would.
Yeah, because DNA does, even, you know, synthetic DNA storage that they're developing it, I would assume it's still susceptible to environmental pressures.
Yeah.
So you'd want to get it into a state that, you know, it's hardened. So we have external hard drives,
right?
But we have tardigrades that are going to last, you know, 5,000 years or 10,000 years. And I like to think of the tardigrade as the data storage that goes sort of with the long now, or like the 10,000 year plan, or, you know, permaculture is 400 years or however many years you want to look into the future. But
Like the Google Poop TV. The Maniac TV series of the poop robot, you know, which is cruising around on the streets. Of course, we have the poop robots at home, too, you know, yeah. The toilet board. Spreading the biome around. Yeah, we're looking for something. Stanford smart toilet, since she was a Stanford fellow, you know? That's interesting to know, I know. Also, I know we're getting a little bit late on time. Can we play this sort of compilation of clips that we put together? Yeah, a little bit? Yeah, that's great. I'm in. Okay, well, it's going to kick me out of here. Okay, cool. Well, and then I just want to sort of point out that I really, because my focus has been still kids. Like, I go far out and I do tardigrades, and then it loops back into preschool. Like, it keeps getting looped back into my starting point, which is maybe one of these cyclical processes. So I really feel like this idea of, like, you know, forest schools with spatial computing, where pre-K Montessori classroom melded with, you know, expeditionary learning in the great outdoors in these environmental conditions with precision-managed organic food, is kind of where things are going. And that's why the Jeff Bezos of the world want to give poor kids Montessori school. Not because they actually care, but because somehow these pre-K classrooms are going to be the next kind of supercomputer offering the Qualia into the machine learning system through this fungal symbiotic or predatory symbiotic networking system. It's going to sound really good because, again, most things like, I'm not against kids playing out in the woods. I did. I thought it was cool. I'm not against kids having healthy food and, you know, local food and all of these things. But then, again, what is it that we're eating? Like, what box? Yeah. Because there's something more going on than the surface story that we're being told. I think, and then being able to sort of prove that it really is there is why your work is so critical in this respect, because, again, I'm not against all of those things either. I think that if you look on the surface of the Montessori method and the Waldorf schools, you know, there's a lot to be said there.
And and then the water is like a shared resource, you know, the cup and the well. And what you were saying about homeopathy or information in the water, I kind of took some pictures and put in my blog, what if the next quantum computer looks like a lichen moss covered boulder? That consciousness. Is this, because we're dealing with wet net computing, right? We're dealing with an era where Freeman Dyson, you know, Esther's dad, is talking about biomanufacturing, bioengineering.
Growing tables.
I can imagine that in 50 years, biotech would have reached the point where we can grow things rather than making them, so that a very large amount of our industry sort of will be converted to biotech instead of manufacturing things in the old-fashioned way, which has to be done in big quantities. You grow them, so that all you need is just to write out the genetic instructions, and the super chicken or whatever it is produces all the stuff that you want. And that will, of course, be a new art form. It will be a profound change in the way we do things.
So this would be growing inert, inorganic objects using a biological system?
It would be, I mean, just as we use wood for making tables today, wood is a biological material, but you could do a lot more. You could have the table grow itself instead of having to be made. If I'm right, it will happen in about 50 years,
wetware, things that it's not looking like this metal frame thing or even a watch wearable thing or whatever. It's looking squishy. And I can't remember this woman, she shared with me, I can't remember the guy's name. He's like a horror film director, well known, and it was a
John Carpenter.
John Carpenter.
I think is who you're thinking of.
Yeah, and
John
there was a
Carpenter.
game, and in the game, it was an augmented reality game with sort of like many worlds. And in the game, part of it was that the technology was biologically based and goopy. One of the scenes was the factory with this old fish shed warehouse, and people were deconstructing the fish, and in the fish were the components, the biological components to make a bone gun or something like that. It was totally bioprocessing and within this augmented reality game. So clearly some of the people in the know that. Oh, and I wanted to mention in the Diamond Age with Neil Stephenson, there's a lot of nanotech wetware biocomputing, sometimes managed through, whatever, the Kundalini aspect of, wetware exchange. And it was happening in these caverns under Vancouver, in these drum circle trance states, where one of the protagonists, who was the engineer, lost all sense of time. And he was like down there for generations or whatever in this biocomputing underground cavernous biological consciousness system. So I feel like these science fiction writers kind of have a tap into, if not the exact nature of how it's going to be, at least the broad strokes of how the story is going to be unspooled before us.
Hollywood there's lots of other channels that talk about that, but Hollywood is more than just a bunch of creative people getting together and entertaining.
Yeah.
Something there. But I like the water, if the water carries a message beyond just H2O, right? Which I don't think it's just H2O. And
well, it's programmable, right? Like there's the piece, like with the legs. You
have so much there with the water, and then if you have that desiccated human tardigrade chimera, when the rehydration process takes place, even moss, just for a simple example, moss dries out really quickly. And then when the rains come back and it just poof, like it rehydrates very quickly. But is there something else that's coming with that? If we're we can manipulate or control what's in the water, not just what's physically in the water, but what sort of intelligence is in the water?
Right.
Has the water been programmed with a new energy, a treatment, and a nanotech aside, let's say there's no nano in it. It's ultra pure water that's been sort of told what to do with, like the Marcel Vogel and his water and his crystals, the Vogel cut crystals, and that kind of segues back to the whole Cleve Baxter and plants, but Marcel Vogel really was fascinated with what we could do with water. And then of course the Masura Emoto, I think, the Japanese photographer who kind of documented the intentions that we put into water. So if we had programmed water and tardigrade type chimera for whatever purpose to explore inner space, what is going on there with the rehydration? And I feel like that's where that next level of awareness or next level of
and we have a guy who'd like to be president who is a river keeper, right? Who is all part of the water keepers.
In a river keeper, I find that very oxymoronic, like it's...
How do you keep a river?
Keep a river, I get it. Because, environmentalist, I'm consider myself a guy who wants to protect the environment also. But yeah, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, he's also the guy that wants to declare a public health emergency for our children on day one, and so... a public health emergency.
Because there's nothing that we want more than to have the government managing our well-being.
Another public health emergency, yes, please. It's been only 4 years. I need another one, and I want.
But this one is our team. We're going to do it right this time, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's the children. It's again, it's really all of these things. They do seem to have a common thread that leads back to the children. Most of all,
when I am the president of the United States, I am going to end the chronic disease epidemic in this country. If I have not significantly dropped the level of chronic disease in our children, By the end of my first term, I do not want you to reelect me.
The child's mind, the liminal state of what's going on when the child begins to perceive the world and starts to formulate its ideas and solve problems. The child's trying to solve problems and find
and
its
establish
way.
identity, like
And
itself,
establish identity.
what's of itself and what's not of itself.
Yeah, and it's, you know, I get to live that world every day right now with the 2-year-old, and, you know, it's, why is she screaming? It's like, oh, her shoe fell off, you know, and there's just all these little things that for a child's, it's a beautiful time for us and our family, but it's also chaotic, very chaotic to be.
But imagine the emergence, right? Like there's a lot of potential.
Great potential, you know, and so it's just, how do we, I have no idea. How do we, what the right way to raise a child is anymore. I sort of, I'm very skeptical of what I'm being fed and what the Montessoris are telling me to do. And there's these gnomes popping up in the garden.
Don't do the smart slippers, right?
Yeah, the smart slippers, the smart diapers, like diaper diagnostics.
Right.
Plus
for your
baby first
microbiome,
TV.
right? Like syncing your diaper to your television entrainment device.
I think it's a thing. I feel like I'm not keeping up with the times because I don't know, you know, I don't have the smart diapers. I can't, you know, I just.
What are you gonna do, right? You know?
Yeah, you Luddite. You can't get the smart diapers for your kid. Yeah.
Well, imagine the Tanzania baby on the blockchain, and then you link up with Procter & Gamble's smart diapers, you know, and then all that data feeds into the tardigrade twin later, you know. And the Verily wastewater scans.
What they're going to need to eat, right? Because the tardigrade twin is, you know, going to have a similar biome, right? Because it's microbiome.
It's informational. I don't know.
You know, informational. And so then what sort of digital food would you have to feed that digital twin?
When my kid was little, I remember there was a thing called the diaper genie. It was like a tube. I don't know if they still exist. Chemically perfumed trash bag, sort of like a tube. And you'd shove the you know, and I didn't do cloth diapers, so, you know, you can slap me on the wrist. But if you put the thing down in there and then you twisted it and it was supposed to contain it with, you know, certainly chemical fragrances or something like that. But you think about just the naming of these things. The genie, the diaper genie, right? Are they going to have the Google poop genie, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, that from the Maniac TV series, that was the poop robot,
right?
You know, which is cruising around on the streets.
I hadn't thought about that as far as like
robots
information.
At home too.
Yes.
You know? Yeah.
The toilet board.
Spreading the
toilet.
biome around.
Yeah, I wonder how Nicole feels about
something.
Stanford Smart Toilet since she was a Stanford fellow, you know? It'd be
Should ask
interesting to know. I know. Well, so I know you're getting a little bit late on time. Can we play this sort of compilation of clips that we put together?
Yeah.
A little bit and
that sounds great.
Comment
I'm
on
good.
it? Okay. Well, so
until they kick me out of here.
Okay, cool. Well, and then I just want to sort of point out that I really, because my focus has been still kids. I go far out and I do tardigrades and then it loops back into preschool. I keep getting looped back into my starting point, which is maybe one of these cyclical processes. So I really feel like this idea of forest schools with spatial computing where pre-K Montessori classroom melded with expeditionary learning in the great outdoors and these environmental conditions with precision managed organic food is kind of where things are going. And that's why the Jeff Bezoses of the world want to give poor kids Montessori school. Not because they actually care, but because somehow these pre-K classrooms are going to be the next kind of supercomputer offering the qualia into the machine learning system. Through this fungal symbiotic or predatory symbiotic networking system. And it's going to sound really good because, again, most things like I'm not against kids playing out in the woods. I thought it was great. Yeah. I'm not against kids having healthy food and local food and all of these things. But then, again, what is it that we're in? Like what box?
Yeah.
Because there's something more going on than the surface story that we're being told.
I think, and then being able to sort of prove that it really is there is why your work is so critical in this respect. Because again, I'm not against all of those things either. I think that if you look on the surface of the Montessori method and the Waldorf schools, there's a lot to be said there.
The scientific observation
early
is
childhood
a little
education.
Creepy. Like, I didn't realize that about Montessori, was that the teacher was the scientist observer of the children. So it was always based on a sort of a strange observer phenomenon, where ultimately I think that the AI is intended to replace the classroom teacher, like the Internet of Things, when Sepp Kambar, and again, wildflower, kindergarten, wildflowers, permaculture, soil, the AI, the outside-in robot, the AI camera on the ceiling, the Internet of Things slippers, the sensors and all of the toys are supposed to replace the caring human teacher. But even was that caring human was that the right model? That you do the scientific observation as independent agent-based learners? Like, I don't know. I didn't have my kid in Montessori.
Evidence-based practitioner, or they're evidence-based therapy. So we're doing evidence-based education, and your teacher has their own lifelong learning digital counterpart as well. And so I don't know if replacing the teacher is actually the end game, but allowing the teacher to live up to the teacher's full potential so that the teacher can be better at helping the students live up to their potential, these young minds to grow this garden of young minds. We do want children to eat healthy food and play outside.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm not, because it's hard. I mean, it's just hard to have this conversation. Even in the Agenda 21, oh my God, I hate the bike lanes. And I'm like, well, I kind of like a bike lane. Like, there's certain things that I actually don't mind. I just don't want it to be a game. Like, and have Google involved and have betting involved. Like, I don't want that part. But there are things about walkable communities or trees or, that farmers markets or whatever that I don't dislike. And so it's very hard to tease apart.
Well, it's human capital. And there's a reason that you have to send it's a law that your child has to go to school. But, it's not a law that we have to vote. So I always like reminding people that, like, the fact that you have to send your kids to school, I feel like that's worth noting. I mean, that's why.
But the thing is, they're going to want to spy on you in your house. That's what I'm trying to get across to the unschooling and the homeschooling and the conservatives and it's interesting because Lynn had spent some time, the Texas Republican Committee was meeting in San Antonio. So she and her colleagues were trying to advocate around the school choice voucher issue and what was really going on. And there's two teams. There's one group that understands that if you take the money, that's going to come with a certain level of oversight that is ultimately the goal. And then there are the other people who are like, no, take the money. We want the accountability. And it's quite interesting when you think about the teaming and knowing the narratives and having the digital twins is that Lynn said that their narrative was that of the half of the group was that they need strings attached. And they literally said strings attached. So to me, that indicates tether, entanglement. And the button they pushed to get everyone to agree was that they said these ESA education savings accounts. They found that there was someone who used their federal ESA money to get an abortion. Beep. And then everyone's like, well, of course we need the strings attached. We can't let that happen, right? And so they would be willing to blockchain their children into the ant computer or the slime mold computer in order to satisfy this archetypal response, which is known by the AI. If we say this, they will react this way. And so what, as you said, what do we get them to do to move around on the game board? And they have the script. So, Lynn did her level best to try to broaden the conversation, but when people are brain boxed, it's very difficult to get in there and create some space for considering other hypotheses.
Yeah, well, they hit that emotional trigger, bringing in an issue that's somewhat not related, and then bringing it into that political, hot button issue, and using that fear. But if Lynn, if you're watching, so I live in Clark County, and there's a program called River Home Link, which is a homeschool hybrid. It's publicly funded homeschool with a 2-day-a-week option. So you go to school 2 days a week in the classroom, and then you're home with your technology or your tablet and whatnot. And of course, enrollment surged following the lockdowns. But I was doing a little work on this and looking back, and I guess it started in 1996, which is quite a while ago to be doing some sort of hybrid homeschool model. And so a lot of the families in Clark County have been pro homeschool for a long time, and so read into that however you will. But the control, the link, right? And almost all of the homeschool.
And it's the river, right?
Yeah, and it's a river. It's called River of Information. I mean, it's sort of obvious at that point, but the home link, like you said, they want to see what's going on at home just as much as they want to see what you're doing academically, because it's what you're doing, and then you have the ubiquitous sensing 24/7. And it's just, I feel like the homeschool stuff is sort of its own little slice of the pie of the ubiquitous sensing.
Well, because it's the parent-child
aggregated.
interaction. I think that's actually Mark Zuckerberg's wife, her focus, because she was a doctor, she set up a whole school for low-income kids that was specifically involved the parent piece, like parent-child interaction. Heckman Social Impact Bonds in Chicago was the parent-child community centers. Sepp Kamvar's model for Montessori, they pitched it as, we really want to know about the whole family. And so all of these, and I was thinking about the Heckman, where he was saying, the guy from Pittsburgh was saying, with PBS Kids, we can't get the parents to make the kids use the app. These are like 2- and 3-year-olds to use PBS Kids data mining behavior apps, right? Tony the Tiger's Tea Party or something like that.
Daniel Tiger.
Daniel Tiger. Okay,
you're close.
I was
Tiger's
mixing
neighborhood.
Tony the Tiger was a cereal. Daniel Tiger's Tea Party, and they're like, we can't get the parents to make the kids use the app. And Heckman's like, oh well, we should just incentivize, make a kid game for the parents and incentivize it with pornography for the parents. I mean, it was atrocious, and you see this on the University of Chicago, Human Capital HCEO Economic Opportunity channel, and you're like, oh my God, this is what we're dealing with, right?
Part of the goals of this was to prove that we could, in fact, get all of these things into one tablet app and distribute them in other places at the same time, and have all the tracking working, and have the real-time reports to parents working, and have the assessment stuff. Okay, study design for this. Measure Up exists as a kid product. Supervision exists as a parent product. So 3 conditions. Control gets other games that don't have anything to do with measurement. They don't get Measure Up personally. Second condition gets Measure Up only for the kids, no parent connection. Third condition gets Measure Up plus the parent. And the idea here is for us to tease apart any effects that we find that are pursuant to the use of the parent application. Yeah, there's a lot of debate right now about what you have to do to get a parent to want to engage in the tool. Is this just a no-brainer? Are they going to use it? No, I don't think it is at all. In fact, I think this is a key challenge. Parents will tell you that they really care. Parents will tell you that they want to be a good parent. It's aspirational. They will repeatedly give you false information about their expectations for how they will use a product like this. It isn't until you pin them down with crafty strategies before you can start to get at the truth. One example would be the third time, I had them tell me what I wanted to hear through 2 different trials with parents, finding out what they think about us at some point. Finally, on the 3rd trial, the innovation in the design was to have them plot their day before we show them any products or ask them anything about this. Plot their day. Then we had them circle the parts of their day where they think they're actively involved in parenting. So they did that. Then we showed them all the products, and then we said, hey, would you use it? And they told us the same story. Yeah, we would. And then we said, now please point on the diagram of your day where you would actually use this. And they all said, oh yeah, I don't know, I'm not sure, because they're so busy. It's something that we're looking at now. We're definitely not giving up on this. This is key. We already know that when the parent is involved, that the outcomes are way better. So,
but what about a build-a-child game for the parent? No, in other words, you gamify for the parent. You're making the parent into some kind of wise educational administrator.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
you could even have pornography, I guess. Something that would entice them. I'm just, sorry about pornography, but I'm just thinking how to motivate them.
We need to innovate here. We need to manage the psychology of the parents. We need to meet them where they are. We need to use what they have, and we need to let them do it.
But what they really wanted was the dynamic of the parent getting the kid to use the app. It wasn't just the kid using it. It was the step down from the domestication, the acculturation within the family unit to get them to do the thing. And so many of these social impact finance schemes are linked to, again, maternal child care, like the mother, pregnant women and the babies, or then when they come out, like the family environment and the children. And this is historical, but now you have the quantified self. and feeding all of these permanent ledgers and intergenerational, this Lamarckian epigenetics. And it's just it's like a lot. Okay, let's watch the fungi. Let me
Let's
save
watch
this
some
one.
clips.
Let's watch the clip.